Once you start disputing invalid deductions with certain distributors or retailers, they do make note of that, and then they tend to respond to you, or they kind of understand that, all right, they're watching their deductions.
Welcome to the Startup CPG podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Freitag. I once received a check from a distributor for $500, but it listed a ton of invoices. I dug in, and that check was for $40,000 worth of product. It was a combination of unauthorized free fills that led to a broker conversation and double charges for a big distributor promotion plan that was expensive before doubling it. But the amount of time it took to track down all that info, dispute, follow up, and receive a check back was astronomical, and that was just one of the many instances to investigate. So how can you protect your margins from invalid deductions and understand what's going on in your business even with valid deductions? It's not easy, so today we have Bill, a senior client success manager at Inmar Intelligence with over a decade in deductions management experience. Inmar has a deductions-linked software platform that helps reduce invalid deductions and simplify workflows, reducing deductions administrative work by up to 80%. Listen in as Bill covers types of deductions, common deduction pain points, how technology can be leveraged to sort out all the portals, PDFs, and even stacks of paper and understand what's going on in your business, how to evaluate when to use a vendor for deductions management, what insights to look for from a deductions management process and how to use that information in your business, what it can look like to dispute deductions with and without outside help, how to prepare your brand for working with a deductions management vendor, questions to ask a potential vendor, expectations for the deductions management process and when to expect returns, and more. Hi, Bill. Welcome to the show today. How are you?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I am very excited to talk about deductions because it's such a hot topic in our community and excited to have an expert like yourself here. So would love if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and about Inmar.
Sure. Thank you for having me today, join this podcast and talk more about deductions management. My name is Bill Poor. I'm a senior client success manager for Deductions Link here at Inmar. Prior to joining Inmar, I spent 10 plus years working with Mars and Ferrero in various AR positions, focuses on cash application and deduction automation and looking at what best practices are available for a CPG. Here at Inmar Intelligence, we make businesses smarter to improve customers' lives. Through the use of data and technology, we uncover valuable insights that make it easier for brands and retailers to understand, predict, and meet the personal needs of consumers.
Awesome. That's great. And so I would love if to kind of set our goal today is to kind of give a 101 overview of deductions. So I'm wondering if you could start us out with just some key definitions of what is a deduction? When we're talking about deductions, what falls into that bucket? And then from there, maybe some of the common types of deductions that, most emerging brands are going to see most frequently.
Sure. It's interesting. When I first, started my career, what a deduction was, all of a sudden, retailers and distributors were just short paying invoices. So for example, an invoice would be for $10,000 and the retailer or distributor will pay $9,000. So that $1,000 difference is identified as a deduction, sometimes referred to a chargeback or a short pay. But that deduction must be researched further. And you have to determine and understand what deduction type that is. So there's a various number of deduction types that exist, and different businesses will set up different deduction types that belong to their P&L and expense accounts. But there's mainly two deduction categories. First is trade, and second is non-trade deductions. So for trade deductions, these will cover allowances, advertisements, rebates. These programs are typically set up by the sales team, and they will be expensed to the trade budget that the sales team will own. So a lot of these deductions we anticipate receiving. We just want to confirm that those deductions are the correct amount that the sales team set up the promotions for. The second category, when it comes to non-trade deductions, these are more shortages, damages, returns, spoils. These are expensed to various budget owners, and these deductions really give you an understanding of what your business, the business operations, what the supply chain team are working on, and how that product is getting delivered to the customer, at what expense are these deductions being returned. So having good visibility on these deductions is also important.
Right. Yeah. And how, I don't know if if you have data on this, but I'm curious, like how often this is wrong, or like, like why is this something as an emerging brand that you would worry about? Like maybe you don't have huge volumes at a distributor like UNFI or K here yet. Like, why is this something that we're worried about? Like how common is this that something goes wrong within deductions? And then you mentioned like sometimes it's kind of about allocating that, money went out to the right buckets too. So kind of curious about those different pieces.
Yeah, so I think we can, further break down the deductions into, three types of what's kind of common in the industry: pre-authorized, unauthorized, and preventable. So your pre-authorized deductions, those are mostly your trade deductions that typically about 80% of your deductions will be trade related. That's changed a little bit over the last 2 years with the supply chain industry, where we're kind of seeing an uptick in supply chain related deductions due to the constraints on shipping product on time and in full. But historically, your trade deductions will be 80% of your deduction dollar amount. So these are authorized. We expect these deductions. But there's a percentage anywhere from 10 to 25% that are unauthorized, where we didn't anticipate these deductions. Some of these can be invalid, and some of these can be researched and investigated to see what percentage was taken off, was the correct price on the invoice. So there's a lot of area when it comes to unauthorized deductions where businesses can charge these deductions back to the distributors, charge these back to the retailers, and collect on those invalid deduction amounts. And then the third bucket is preventable. So you're going to get 10 to 15, maybe 20% of your deductions that are actually preventable. So if you make changes within your business on how you ship your products, what label you may put on your product, this will prevent the retailer and distributor taking compliance related deductions that they are valid because they, your business was doing something incorrectly. So they're entitled to take that deduction based on their vendor compliance guide. But if you make a business change internally, you can avoid those deductions in the future. So if you get a better understanding of what deductions are preventable, that can be going down to, close to 0% as you make more improvements with your business operations.
Right. Okay. And how do you generally see deductions kind of come across, the desk for your company? Like you mentioned that, an invoice being paid to you is less than you expected it to be. Like, what are the different ways that we can see, is it a breakdown on the check? Is it separate documentation? Is it something that you have to request? Like, how do we find out more information about individual deductions and where they're coming from and what buckets they're part of?
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest pain points today is, getting the information in the documents to understand each individual deduction. So what the retailer and distributor will provide is a remittance. That remittance will be a summary of all the deductions that they're taking on that payment. But then you have to go typically to a portal and look for each individual backup document manually, one by one, which can be very time consuming to go look for 100 deductions on one remittance. So once you get that documentation, then you can do further analysis on to see whether it's valid or invalid. And that's where automation really comes into play, where systems are able to go out to the portal and automatically extract and aggregate this data and put it in a single solution where your team can do more analyzing to see if that deduction is valid.
Interesting. Yeah. Like I remember with UNFI, used to get packets in the mail that were just like half an inch thick or something like that. And then it was like, great, these are hard copy documents. And then finally found the contact at UNFI to get them electronically, but then still it looked like they'd been printed out and scanned, was the quality of the documents. And so it just was like, oh man, this is going to take hours, days to get through all the pages of this. Can the automation that you're talking through help sort through those kind of documents as well? Like if they're not in a portal and you're just getting PDFs thrown at you?
Absolutely. So any email that gets sent over, our system's able to aggregate that data and tie it to the deduction that's listed on the remittance. So even if it's one deduction, for example, say $100, it may be 15 pages of detail that make up the $100 of all the different SKUs, all the different UPCs, and then the end retailer that the distributor delivered that product to.
Okay, very interesting. And then as a brand, since you mentioned that 80% of deductions are related to trade, any recommendations for how brands can keep track of like what you've authorized out there as far as trade, so you can check back across it? Because you may be using brokers, you may have sales team members that are out there potentially authorizing deals or creating paperwork, and it's a lot to keep track of when you're getting into lots of new accounts, potentially lots of independent accounts. Curious about any recommendations that you see for keeping that organized so that you can compare deductions as they roll into what's real, what's not.
Yeah, so I've seen many, smaller CPGs keep track of this on manual spreadsheets, which is very difficult to understand your deduction versus what trade promotion was planned. So having a system that's able to keep track of your trade promotions as well as your deductions that are coming in. So when you receive a deduction, you can tie it directly to that trade promotion event. And then you can have more analysis and understand if that promotion performed well, where you may want to run this again next month or next year for certain retailers and distributors. So having that type of visibility will definitely help better manage the trade spend, which ties to that 80% of deductions.
Okay. And as deductions come in, is there a way to rate either using automation or on your own? Do you recommend kind of bucketing them into the degree of like recoverability, like right away, like, oh, like we know that this is maybe wrong, but there's a 5% chance that we're going to get it back. So maybe it's not worth the time to pursue it, versus these kind we know are easy to dispute because we have all the documentation. Like, curious about that, like how to, pursuing and recovering those deductions and deciding which bucket to place a deduction into.
Yeah, so I think it's important, and a lot of the systems have reason codes or deduction types, so you're able to understand where that deduction falls. So understanding the deduction type first will help you determine what chance you have on getting that repaid. And then the documents, the supporting documents that are needed. So for example, if you're going to dispute a trade promotion deduction, you need the promotion, the event, the contract information to bring that back to the distributor to collect on that invalid deduction, as well as like a shortage or OS&D deduction. You'll need the proof of delivery, a copy of the invoice on, all right, we shipped 100 cases and invoiced 100, but you only paid us for 90. Here's the POD that shows that the product was shipped in full. So having all these documents stored in a single location will help give more visibility and help recover a higher percentage of invalid deduction.
Okay, right. And how long do you have generally to dispute a deduction? Because I've been in the boat where like they've kind of piled up. You realize that there's been a mistake, and then it's like, oh shoot, like we're way past the window to dispute this because it took us so long to get through all the documentation. So like, how often should you be reviewing this so you make sure you don't miss the window if you do have a dispute?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've seen more and more distributors and retailers close that window on when you can dispute back to. Typically it's 60 to 90 days, and then they close that window where if you put a dispute in, they're not even going to recognize it, even if it's invalid. So it's really to be proactive. So when you receive that remittance from the distributor, to look at those deductions and start processing them right away will really help that start that clock, so you're able to collect sooner, and you don't run into an issue where you're getting impacted by their cutoff dates, whether it's 60 or 90 days.
Mm-hmm. Would you include as part of this process as well sometimes you can have a partner maybe take advantage or incorrectly use a prompt pay discount? Is that something you can track in this process as well, whether there actually was a prompt pay and it made sense to take the percent discount, or maybe they just took it off but they actually paid you way later than they said they were going to?
Yeah, so these are very common, and these are listed on the remittance as deductions. So you're able to research and identify if that cash discount was valid. they took the cash discount and paid within 10 or 20 days, whatever their terms are. And if it's outside of that, you can go back and dispute that. And I've seen a high success on getting those repaid if they're outside of their discount terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And then, as we've talked about, these deductions can be expensive. Like they can really erode your margins. How do you have any recommendations for kind of how to view these different pieces from and how they affect your accounting and how you view your like profitability and your product margin? Like how do those go together? Because, it seems like you could just kind of, I think an incorrect way would just be like, well, I gave all these huge discounts on this product and just kind of pretend that the deductions weren't there or bucket them all in the same bucket. Like, how do you make sure that everything is tying in correctly so that you know actually what your margins are and you're not just kind of letting them accidentally erode?
So that's a challenge. That's another pain point that we've seen, especially with distributors when they're taking their deductions. They're complex, multiple PDF format with a lot of different UPC and brands. So to go and validate that discount by discount by end retailer is challenging. So that's where automation comes into play and aggregating all that data into from a PDF to an Excel version is just more helpful. So then your analysts are able to do a little bit more insight on if that is truly valid. And then a lot of the retailers and distributors, they don't give enough information on their deduction. So sometimes you have to reach back further out and say, okay, you took this $10,000 promotion deduction. What does it belong to? What event does it belong to? What brand does it belong to? So working with them to get more information will help you be able to, one, see if it's valid, and two, where do we expense it? What promotion, what event, or what expense account are we going to expense this deduction that we deemed valid? And then just the high volume of deductions that come from distributors. Like I mentioned, there could be 100, 200 deductions on one remittance from a UNFI or a KeyHe. So to go through all that one by one is very time consuming, a manual effort. So having more automation in place can help that process. And then you could do more analyzing, more value added activities on that deduction to see ultimately, is it valid? Is it invalid? And then to expense it to the correct GL account or promotion event. And the important part of expensing all your deductions correctly, then it shows you, as you track month over month and you track year over year, you can get a better understanding of the health of your business and the business operations. So it's really important that if it's a shortage or a spoils or it's a returns or trade versus non-trade, however the business is going to expense their different types of deductions, they're doing so efficiently and with more accuracy with automation in place. So it's kind of, an overview there of that.
Right. Yeah. Or even noticing themes like within operations, like maybe you're using a certain freight provider and every time there's some like reloading or lumper fees happening or something, you're like, well, that's weird. Like maybe I should look into that. And then you work with your freight partner and you're able to like eliminate that hiccup or figure out a different way to go direct to the warehouse that, you're not getting charged for different unloading or whatever. You can kind of see a window into how to make those things more efficient, or if you're able to catch those.
Exactly. And, that's where, having all this information, you could do a little bit more of a root cause analysis and understand, all right, do I need to use a different carrier? Or maybe there's something that we can change in the warehouse on how we ship this product so we don't get these fines and fees and, different deductions that some people will just say it's the cost of doing business. But in reality, if you make a change to your business, it's no longer a cost. You're able to avoid those types of deductions altogether.
Right. Do you find that brands are able to kind of develop a relationship with their, whether it's just, often a distributor on this over time of if you kind of get in a cadence of disputing or asking questions, like, can you kind of develop that relationship so it's a little bit less of a black hole or, you're reaching out in emergency, like, wondering if it helps kind of over time to be the consistent person that's like, hey, I have a question. Hey, I think this is wrong, or, those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely being more persistent has its benefits. The challenging part today is a lot of the contact emails are generic emails. So it's very hard to actually reach a person when you're trying to talk about deductions So really having the sales team get involved, working with the buyer, has been pretty successful in getting further deductions repaid and further deduction document that has been missing to better understand what you're receiving.
Right. Do you think that there's like a number of deductions per month or a dollar amount per month where it starts to make sense to look at like, okay, maybe some outside help would help me recover this, some of pieces of this?
Yeah. So, we literally look at, once you're over 100 deductions per month, then it's really time to do more of analysis that it's kind of hard for one person just to pull all those documents and actually look at, just because it's one deduction, it may have 10 pages of documents that you have to kind of go through. So really that's the volume where it starts to tip the scale and you're looking for outside help.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you're looking at outside help too, it sounds like there's some AI automation, but I'm guessing you also want to work with, like you said, a team that has some experience in this space. What else do you recommend, asking someone if you're reaching out to them about working with them on your deductions? Like how can you help vet that this is going to be the right team for you to work with to really help free up time for your brand and hopefully free up dollars?
Yeah. So, freeing up time is very important, but as well as dollars and collecting on those invalid deductions. So, there's certain retailers that have the tendency that they take invalid deductions for certain deduction types. So having that experience, you'd be able to get a better understanding of which deductions to do further investigate and which deductions have a higher chance to be recovered. And that really depends on the distributor or on the retailer, as well as certain CPGs will set up threshold tolerances. So, for example, if you have a $10,000 deduction, that may be large for your business where you want multiple eyes to review that. Where if you get a deduction for 25 cents, you may not really need 4 people to approve that. It can kind of just, some people don't even look at those deductions or they won't even want to kind of pull the backup for those deductions because the dollars don't really have an overall impact on the business's profitability. So a lot of those smaller deductions can sometimes just get, automatically expensed without doing research.
Okay. What would be like a best practice report, or like how should you, if you're using a vendor to help you with your deductions process, like what should you receive as a brand? What other, would a service provider help you actually go after recovering any deductions? And then what kind of like reporting or like information would you be able to look at it as a brand, as far as like, oh, we recovered XYZ number, or here's how many there were for the month? Like curious about what you should ask for, hope to see as a brand your vendor provides you.
The first is, the P&L profitability per retailer or distributor. That, depending on how many deductions they're taking, you can get a better understanding based on your gross sales on how much deductions they're taking versus how much deductions are being repaid. So having this level of visibility will help better understand of, are you profitable with this distributor or retailer? Changes need to be made depending on the deduction types that are coming in.
Okay. So can a vendor like Inmar help with recovering and like the back and forth relationship with the distributor or retailer of asking for documents or even submitting the forms for recovering information and keep track of like what's been paid, what hasn't been paid?
Absolutely. So, we have a dedicated team of AR professionals that are able to reach out to different distributors and retailers to ask for additional backup, as well as go on customer portals to pull documents or go on customer portals to dispute invalid deductions, as well as email where certain distributors will want disputes emailed to them. So vendors are able to kind of manage all of that on behalf of the CPGs, as well as kind of when you look at the sales side, brokers are able to kind of assist the sales team in selling the product on behalf of the brand. So this back office function area, you're able to, work directly with this distributors and retailers to get information that's needed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you find that like leveraging the power of a large company like Inmar, like can be helpful in recoverability versus like I'm small brand XYZ. I want to dispute this charge versus, versus reaching out as, hey, we're with Inmar and they know that you do this all day, every day. You know that you're doing your due diligence on everything. Like, do you find that can help in recoverability to kind of leverage an outside, firm that maybe has a relationship with these, with these distributors?
Yeah, we've shown you're going to have a much higher percentage on collecting invalid deductions when you go with a vendor like Inmar, because there's a few things on where that benefit's going to come from. Is there's a lot of different portals, there's a lot of different ways you have to dispute deductions, and it's hard for a new brand to know where all these portals are, to know how to dispute certain deductions, who to dispute them with, and where to dispute them. So having all that knowledge already built in is very helpful, and that's where you're going to see more deductions that are going to be repaid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely sent off a deductions dispute like just into the void, and then later found out like a month later, like that wasn't even the right email address, or that person didn't work there anymore. And like you find some new form that's like, oh, okay, cool, I'll do that now. So being able to leverage like, someone that knows the current active process for all these different places sounds extremely helpful.
Yeah. And as well as like some retailers, they take a long time to repay some of these deductions. So, it's not always a quick turnaround where you put the dispute in and you get repaid in 1 to 2 weeks. Sometimes it's 1 to 2, even 3 months before deductions are going to be repaid. So having a system in place where you're able to track and manage all those disputes in a single location will really help manage that and be able to collect more invalid deductions.
At a higher volume, would you say that sometimes, having deductions management help could like pay for itself, quote unquote, of, you're finding enough things to dispute, you're finding enough issues, you're providing, that the money may be coming back can sometimes outweigh the cost of using a service. There's definitely the time savings for your team. That's a whole nother piece, but kind of curious on the, like what you're recovering versus, what you're often paying for a service.
Yeah. The time savings, one big benefit, but also we've seen, certain clients, the tool pay for itself, in the first 3 months because they were able to collect, more invalid deductions than they have in the last 3 years. So, there's definitely that aspect of having a tool in place and having a process in place. Maybe upfront will cost some more money, but at the end you do get better visibility with your deductions and you start recovering more on invalid deductions. And the one thing I'll add too is once you start disputing invalid deductions with certain distributors or retailers, they do make note of that. And then they tend to respond to you, or they kind of understand that, all right, they're watching their deductions and, they're probably correct if they keep on disputing these deductions. So they pay a little bit more attention to you because there's certain brands out there that don't dispute any deductions. They kind of just take a deduction and they say, this is the cost of doing business. We're just going to make the assumption that it's valid, when in fact they're, really impacting their bottom line because a lot of those deductions are recoverable.
Right. Okay. And what would you say on the brand side that you can do as a brand? Like we mentioned, most of our brands have very small teams. If you're going to hire an outside vendor, what can you do to prepare and make the most of that relationship? Like you mentioned a little bit earlier of like having documents organized, like, like proofs of delivery or like your sales planning tools. Like when you're onboarding brands, like, do you have an example of like, XYZ brand came on board and they were so organized and it was like, it made our job a breeze? Like, what can a brand, do to be a really great partner and make it so that the process is really smooth?
Yeah. So we've seen customers onboard in 4 weeks or less because they had all the information that they needed. So it's critical to have your processes in place on where, once we identify the deduction and it's valid, where do you want to expense that? So that's kind of going back to the list of deduction types that typically correspond with the GL code or a cost center or profit center. And then having that built out really helps with the automation, and you're able to expense the deductions fairly quickly. And then just looking for something that's customizable to meet your business needs. So like every business processes deductions a little bit slightly different. So being able to, understand what's important to them, what's important to the new brand. They may, at what depth of validation or what depth of the deductions are they going to? Like I mentioned earlier, some CPGs want to know the UPC level, the SKU level of each deduction. Others just want to, roll that up to the brand. And others don't, they don't just want to know, all right, this is trade. This goes to the trade bucket. This is spoils. This goes to the spoils bucket. So they don't really need much detail. So really just depends on that CPG and what's important to them. And then we're able to kind of work with them and set them up for success when it comes to deductions management.
Right. Okay. Well, I would love if you could tell us a little bit more about, Inmar's deductions solution, and then maybe we'll talk through some of the different onboarding steps, because I'm curious about, kind of walking through what that can look like. But tell us a little bit more about the solution that you all have.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been working, with the solution with the team, and it's really helping CPGs reduce their invalid deductions, and it simplifies their workflow. So the solution's called Deductions Link. We have many clients that are using this SaaS platform. It's very user friendly, and through AI forecasting, this solution allows brands to better manage their deductions. And also, like we talked about, it really reduces the administrative work that kind of helps with the cost. But then when you have better insights, you're able to collect on more deductions at the same time. So this product, as a SaaS platform, has been very helpful. But then as we kind of talk throughout this podcast is, outside help. So we do offer services as well where, we'll have the platform up and running, and the Deductions Link product will be available. But an Inmar team will manage all your deductions, and manage getting all the information into one location and manage all the approvals and disputes. So that's very helpful as well. So depending on, we kind of always say it's like build your own adventure. So depending on the CPG's business needs, no matter how small or how large they are, this tool is able to adapt to various size businesses, as well as if it just wants a software as a service, or do you want additional, a team that's able to, help with cash application and deductions management, looking at different invalid deductions and deduction trends.
Okay, great. So it sounds like there's kind of more of a almost like self-serve of like you're using the AI, it's helping organize things for you, and then you're still going out and using that information, and then you kind of have higher levels of service where you're actually kind of leveraging Inmar's team to provide you guidance or, go into helping you recover and keeping more tabs on everything.
Exactly.
Okay, great. And then you mentioned like, a great example would be having a brand onboard in like 4 weeks. Can you walk us through like what the onboarding process typically looks like for a brand, and anything for, other things for brands to keep in mind for making the onboarding process smooth?
Yeah. So, we've onboarded rather quickly when it comes to the onboarding process. First just getting the information, where do you get your deduction and remittance information today, whether it's from emails or whether it's from portals. We just have to find a way to aggregate that data and get that streamlined to us. And then at what level of depth are you expensing your deductions? So kind of just get a map in, all right, per deduction type, which GL or which cost center is this deduction going to be expensed to? And then our team is great. They're able to build a system, configure the system to the CPG's needs. So they're up and running in a matter of weeks.
Okay. And for the different like buckets you mentioned for like from an accounting perspective, is that something that generally a brand comes into you with a point of view on of, oh, these kind of deductions go to, always go to this account, or is, and if they don't know that, should they work with an accountant, or is that something that your team can provide some expertise on of, oh, generally we see brands put this type of deduction in, a GL account like XYZ?
Yeah. So typically, we can assist with any questions they have on what we see as what, the best practice is. But most of the CPGs that come to us already have their accounts all set up, and their current state is, we take these deductions and they go here. So they have that all already mapped out. But once we understand, once we kind of provide them a little bit more understanding of what the deduction actually is, we've seen them be like, okay, I don't want it to go to this account anymore. It'd make more sense to go hit a different account that's more appropriate to that expense deduction.
Right. Okay. And when you onboard a brand, do you go back a certain amount of time at all as part of that process, or is it all just like going forward?
Great question. We went back. We went back 1 to 2 years with a few clients to go look at all their deductions, to go see what was valid, what was invalid, to kind of do a whole reconciliation project, to help them, clean up their books. Or, if they want to just start as, going forward on whatever date the product is up and running for them, we can go that route as well. So it's really dependent on the CPG's needs, and what's important to them.
Okay. So like you mentioned we talked about the different accounts, that you may be mapping your deductions to. What do you receive as a brand as far as like being able to then like, can you, input that into QuickBooks? Is it a document you can like forward along to your accountant? Like, how does that, at least in the past, that's been a sticking point for me of like, okay, great. I figured out where my deductions go. Now I have to like put that in my book somehow or tell my bookkeeper where to go. How does that piece work?
Yeah. So, prior, it's always been a manual process where you have to manually enter one credit at a time for each deduction. So Deductions Link does have the capability to provide a credit report, kind of an upload file that goes back to the customer's ERP or accounting system, to issue all those credits that were approved back to the customer's account. So that's really come a long way over the last few years in putting that automation in place. So you're not keying in 100 deductions one by one. It's kind of like a bulk upload that will help, expense and put those into the correct categories.
Right. That's super cool. What other kind of, I guess, deliverables or, things do you have access to as a customer? Like we mentioned before, like kind of like a dashboard where you're seeing like by distributor or, by deduction type. But what are the different things that you kind of have access to on a regular basis to be able to log in and better understand your business when you work with Inmar?
So yeah, kind of there's monthly deduction trends and analysis reports that gets generated for each client. But as you log in your system, you'll be able to kind of understand how many deductions are in waiting to be processed, as well as how many deductions are with various approvers waiting to be approved. So it kind of just gives you a good overall understanding of where your deductions stand and what your deduction balance looks like at any point in time. And these are open deductions that haven't been resolved or completed yet. And then when it becomes down to invalid deductions, so you're able to track and manage all your invalid deductions in a single location. So as we mentioned earlier, sometimes it's 60 to 90 days where you kind of have to continue to follow up or not get paid. So you don't want to lose visibility of that. So you're able to kind of track that deduction and see what stage or what part of the repayment process it is in. And then that will help as well. And then you're able to see, and measure how many deductions did you get repaid on in month over month, year over year. So you can start getting more insight on which retailers are taking more invalid deductions, or which changes that you may have to take with your business operations to avoid those deductions.
Right. Do you work more commonly with any specific function within businesses? Like where does often, this deductions piece lie within the business? Obviously, everybody can set up their business the way that makes sense for them, but curious if you kind of interact with more regularly the ops person, or like, who generally is interacting with the portal and with your team, from a, their function perspective.
So the two areas where I've seen most impact is the accounting team as well as the sales team. Like I said, most of the deductions are sales related. So sales always plays a pretty heavy involvement in reviewing these deductions to make sure that they are valid, because it will impact their trade spend and their profitability. And then the accounting team. So, deduction starts when that cash application. So once you post your cash application, all your deductions will get created on that remittance. So your accounting team has the challenge to get all those deductions appropriately assigned and closed without keeping them open on the customer's agent.
Right. Okay, that's great. And then how long do you generally recommend that brands kind of, let the process work when you onboard a new vendor like Inmar on this process, and maybe you've had a history of not reclaiming your deductions and you're eager to get money back in the bank? Realistically, how long does it take to see results? How do you track, if the process is working effectively?
Yeah, so for the most part, you see results rather quickly. And it's kind of an eye opener for the brands that they just didn't know that existed, or they didn't know that these deductions were even coming in because they never pulled the documents. They never had any visibility. So it was very quickly where all of a sudden there's a handful of deductions that are deemed invalid, and you're going back to the distributor or retailer to collect on that. So we've seen that turn around very quickly with most of our newer brands.
Okay, great. And then if any of our listeners are intrigued and want to get a demo of the tool or connect with the Inmar team, what's the best way to reach out? Is it, going to the website, or how do you recommend connecting and learning more?
So if you head to the Inmar page, there's a form where you can fill out with your information, and an Inmar representative will be in touch to help better understand your pain points and better understand your deductions as a whole. So go ahead and fill out that form, and we'll be in touch with you to talk more about deductions and where automation really helps the process.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll definitely make sure the link is in the show notes for everyone to go check out. Definitely something helpful to know what options are out there. And even if you're not quite ready for it yet, hopefully you can learn the options and know when it's going to be the right time to onboard a solution like this, because it seems like the Inmar team has some really awesome technology and support available for our brands, which is awesome. So thank you so much, Bill, for sharing your knowledge on this topic that is, sometimes complicated. So I'm so glad that you could kind of help just shed light on some of these basic processes and what to encounter and how to evaluate how to deal with this. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed the conversation going over deductions, and everyone can just reach out and we'll be happy to help.
Thank you to our partner Inmar for sponsoring this episode. Visit Inmar, INMAR.com to learn more about their Deductions Link program, or find the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening in today. I'm so honored you joined me for this conversation, and I love hearing from you all with feedback, suggestions, or if you just want to say hi at podcast@startupcpg.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. If you liked this episode, we'd love for you to share it with a friend or colleague, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and maybe even leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you aren't yet in our Slack community of founders and experts, we'd love to see you there. You can get the free invite at startupcpg.com and find all our other awesome resources there, like webinars, databases, the blog, the magazine, and virtual and in-person events. And if you found yourself rocking out to our intro and outro music, which I do every single time, make sure to check out the Super Fantastics on Spotify. It's the band of our Startup CPG founder, Daniel Scharf. I'm Jessie Freitag, your host and producer, and on behalf of the whole team at Startup CPG, thank you for being here, and see you next week.